Hey there and welcome. My name is Pete and this is the channel update for the summer of 2026. As always, I want to talk a little bit about what has happened since the last update back in March, which of course was centered around the channel's 10-year anniversary. First of all, I want to say thank you. So many of you sat down and watched a roughly half-hour-long video about everything this channel has gone through over the course of those 10 years, and that genuinely means a lot to me. It was a very personal video for me to make, looking back at all the games, series, and decisions that shaped the channel into what it is today, so seeing that so many of you were interested in that journey really felt special to me. Now, to celebrate the anniversary, I also attempted my first ever speedrun of Mirror's Edge, the first game I ever played on this channel. That was surprisingly well received, and yes, I know, part 2 is still outstanding, but it will follow eventually. I have not forgotten about it, it is simply one of several projects currently waiting for the right moment. Shortly after the anniversary then, we reached another milestone, video number 1000 on the channel. I spent quite a bit of time thinking about what sort of super duper special game would be appropriate for the occasion. After all, 1000 videos is not exactly something that happens every day, more like every decade actually, so part of me felt like the game needed to be equally monumental, if you will. But in the end, I decided to go in a different direction and settled on Duck Detective: The Secret Salami, something lighthearted, fun, and perhaps most importantly, something that could actually be completed in one go. I think that worked rather nicely for the occasion. Instead of starting another enormous project simply because the number attached to the video was special, we got a self-contained little adventure that began and ended with that 1000th upload itself. By the way, I'm not quite sure I mentioned it back in that video, there is a sequel, Duck Detective: The Ghost of Glamping, which appears to be fairly similar in both length and general style, so let me know if that is something you would like to see at some point in the future as well. I certainly would not be opposed. Now, shifting towards our more regular schedule, since the last channel update video, not one but 2 series have also sort of come to an end, RimWorld Odyssey and Baldur's Gate 3, although in the latter case only Act 1. Let us begin with Odyssey. I would not necessarily call the series definitively finished just yet. I did promise the creation of a proper space zoo after all, and I am still planning to make a separate video about that. It is simply a fairly lengthy project, and I do not want to rush through it just for the sake of being able to say that it is done. As for a small review of Odyssey, and I know I have given my thoughts on the expansion here and there in the past, I think overall this expansion lines up with Biotech as one that changes RimWorld the most, and in my opinion changes it for the better. The graph ship adds a tremendous amount of replayability because it allows for an entirely different style of colony. Instead of settling permanently in one location and slowly expanding, we were able to play in a much more nomadic fashion, traveling across large distances with relative ease and taking the colony to places that would otherwise not have been possible in one series or would have required a fairly lengthy expedition. And that freedom of travel was probably the defining feature of the series, and it allowed me to approach RimWorld in a way that felt genuinely new even after so many previous playthroughs. The Mech Hive ending, on the other hand, was perhaps a little underwhelming. Mechanically, it felt somewhat like the Anomaly ending with just a fresh coat of paint, and while that did not ruin the experience by any means, I think I had hoped for something a little more distinct. Still, the series itself was a lot of fun, and the graph ship alone gives Odyssey a huge amount of potential to be incorporated in future playthroughs. Speaking of which, considering the usual RimWorld timeline, we should be roughly due for another expansion sometime soon, assuming of course that there actually is one coming. Personally, I would love to see an expansion that focuses more heavily on factions and diplomacy. That entire part of the game still feels like it could be developed in a lot of interesting directions. Faction outposts, larger settlements, treaties, alliances, generally more involved diplomatic relationships, all of that could make the world outside of the player's colony feel much more active and meaningful. At the moment, factions often exist mainly as sources of trade, quests or raids, and I think there is a lot of room to make those relationships more dynamic. But that is just what I would personally like to see, so let me know what your hopes would be for another RimWorld expansion. What part of the game do you think deserves more attention? And with that, let us move on to Baldur's Gate 3. First things first, the series is not over. We have only finished Act 1, that is all. I have said for quite some time though that I wanted to take a break once we reached the end of the first act. I just did not expect it to take 42 episodes. And honestly, what an amazing game this is. Despite being 42 episodes and over 100 in-game hours into the series, I have not experienced any real fatigue or disinterest in the game at all. There has not been a single moment where I sat down to work on an episode and thought I would rather be playing something else. The game is simply that good. At the same time, Baldur's Gate 3 episodes take a ton of work. The final episode of Act 1 alone had more than 11 pages of script that I needed to write, and even after spending this much time with the game, there are still decisions with consequences that do not become apparent until much later. That means that planning an episode is not simply a matter of looking at what happens in the next area. In many cases, I also need to research what a decision might affect 10, 20, or perhaps even more hours later, because something that appears harmless in the moment could potentially close off an option or change an outcome much further into the game. That is also one reason why we have not yet used Auntie Ethel's hair or fully committed to what we want to do with the Necromancy of Thay, by the way. The character builds are still far from finished, some build-defining items may not even have been acquired yet, and there are also a few decisions regarding the final party setups that are still somewhat up in the air. For that reason, I do not want to lock myself into permanent stat increases for characters who may turn out not to benefit from them as much as I had hoped. These bonuses are so valuable after all, precisely because they are permanent, so I would rather wait until I have a clearer picture of where every build is ultimately heading. And it is this overall amount of research, planning and scripting that is the main reason why I am taking a break now. It is not because I have lost interest in the game, quite the opposite. I simply want a little more room for other projects without Baldur's Gate 3 occupying the majority of my working week whenever I produce a new episode. Thank you, by the way, for all the kind words on that final episode of Act 1. I saw so many comments praising the series and the amount of work that has gone into it, and that was really lovely to read. Rest assured, I very much want to continue this playthrough and ultimately see it through all the way to the end, no matter how long that may take. For now though, a break should give me the chance to work on a few other things before we eventually begin Act 2. There is also another series that should reach its conclusion fairly soon, The Sims 3 World Adventures. In the most recent episodes, we have begun constructing the final Grand Museum to celebrate everything our adventurers have accomplished throughout the series. At this point, I believe we will probably only need one more trip each to China and France before we can wrap up the main adventure. Afterwards, there may be one or two rather annoying, time-consuming skill challenges still left to complete, but all in all, the end is very much in sight. Which means that, for the first time in quite a while, there is suddenly a lot of room for new and exciting things on the channel. I already have a few ideas. Some are projects that I have been thinking about for several years at this point, while others have only formed a few days ago. Before diving headfirst into several new lengthy series though, I would also like to take care of a few leftovers, if you will. There are still the Dream Missions and Tactical Breach Wizards, the second part of the Mirror's Edge speedrun, and of course the RimWorld Odyssey Space Zoo. All of those are things that I promised at some point, and I would like to check at least a few of them off of the list before I begin juggling several major new projects at the same time. That does not mean there will be no new series until every single loose end has been dealt with. I simply think this is a good opportunity to create a little bit of space and finish some of these smaller projects that might otherwise remain on the list indefinitely. At the same time, I'm also very excited to show you some of the new things I have planned, and as always, I would also be very interested to hear what you would like to see, so let me know your hopes and suggestions for future videos or series in the comments below. I can of course not promise that every suggestion will be turned into something, but I am always curious to see which games and ideas you think would fit the channel. And that is pretty much all I wanted to talk about today. Before we make the cut though, it is once again time to give a shout out to all the new channel members and Patreon supporters who joined since the last update video. So, as always, in no particular order, a big thank you goes out to Jakub Seged, Shakul, Zephyr Demiurge, Xaxuga, Kevin, Helen Farmer, Wrestlin Majir, Space Green Green to the Sea, Eiko Streit, Wako, Malgrim Felldriver, Tavi M, Turkey Walker, Thrift, Marcus Tyvo, Staghound, Moribund, Javon Shantz, Xanin, Gingeritis, Terra Richard, Chris Pang, Happy Squid, Mac Doomborn, Windwave, Axel19, The Tide, Casper Smith Herlev, White Sammy, Krurken, Penny Coates, Anna Banana, Marco Lenzi, Up is Oben, Atros, and A. Mooney. I hope I pronounced all of your names correctly. Above all though, thank you all so much for your generous support. And with that, let's wrap things up for today's channel update video, which ended up being a little longer than I had expected. I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless, and if you did, then I would of course be very happy if you could leave a thumbs up. If you like what I'm doing and want to support me and my channel further, then you can go ahead and subscribe to stay up to date, grab some merch over on shop.petecomplete.com, or become a channel member or Patreon supporter too. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.